We are enjoying the 2024 Pennell Center for Black Church Studies MLKJ Celebration Extravaganza. Yes, round of applause. This is day 2. I hope for those in this place and those of you online, you were able to join us yesterday for Dr. Stanley Talbert, because he definitely opened up our hearts, minds, and spirits to integrated ways to do the work of justice and reconciliation. And today we're going to talk about healing the heart through the arts. So as soon as we start and questions start popping up, write them down, because as soon as we get to Q&A, I have a feeling that it's going to be like popcorn, and we want to make sure that we get to everyone's comments and questions. But before we dive into introducing the panel, let me open us in a word of prayer. God, who is creator, who is creation, who is creativity, we thank you for this moment on this day. We thank you for the breath that is inspiring us in this very moment. And we thank you for our capacity to take that breath and create with our minds, our hearts, and our spirits, that we can express who you've created us to be and who we are seeking to be. And God, we also thank you that with this creativity, we can heal and be healed. May the moments that we share in this place be seeds that are planted, that are watered and nurtured. And as we go throughout this world being light and salt, let us continue to be curious about our creativity. In the blessed name of Jesus Christ, we say together, amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so this is on excellent. And I'm gonna change positions. And I am very excited to allow our panel participants, to introduce themselves, and then I will follow up and introduce myself. I know I haven't even introduced myself. I like to build anxiety because I'm an actor. So I'm building the drama. So I'm going to start with our online participants. We're going to start with Melanie Taylor, then we will go with Dr. Williams, and then we will have our participants here. And if you could, please introduce yourself and why you would be on a panel about healing in the arts. Go ahead, Melanie.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. It's so good to be in the house with the people of the Lord. My name is Melanie Taylor. I graduated from Fuller in 2022 with an MA in Intercultural Studies, and I also have a BS in Sport Management and a Faith and Justice certificate from Georgetown University. Currently, I'm a curatorial assistant at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So I presume that that's a big part of why I'm here on this panel today. But I work directly with the museum curator of sports. I help collect for the sports gallery, as well as offering programming along with the Sports and Race Initiative at the museum. I'm also a resident minister at Georgetown University, where I offer spiritual and emotional support primarily for first-year students, and that's students of any and of no faith tradition in particular.
Welcome, Melanie. Dr. Williams.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Williams. Forgive me, my voice is a bit strange. I normally don't sound like this, but I currently serve as the director of the Office of Black Church Studies and the assistant professor of theology and Black Church Studies at Duke University School of Divinity. But prior to coming to this place, I served for almost 7 years as the curator of religion at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I suspect that it was that work that is partially responsible for my being here today. So I'm interested in art, questions of religion and material culture, but also as one who understands myself as one who preaches, and preaching as an artistic kind of practice. That I also see the beauty and the drama in the African American preaching tradition, and so I'm very excited to be a part of this panel today, and I only wish I could have been in sunny California today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Go ahead.
Hello, hello. A little better. There we go. My name is Dea. I graduated from Fuller in 2019. I have a degree in theology and also a degree in intercultural studies, both with a concentration in theology and the arts. I own a creative agency, and I also run a beautiful community called Inbreak. And we basically hover at the intersections of art and spiritual healing. We are really about asking how the collective may heal through creative means. And so I'm guessing that might be why I'm here. And then also with my own creative practice, everything that I do is about asking how we might collectively find wholeness through many different art forms. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Dea. And Dr. Tyler.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tamisha Tyler. I currently serve as the visiting assistant professor of theology and culture and theopoetics at Bethany Theological Seminary in Indiana. I am also a double alum of Fuller, MDiv and a PhD in theology and culture, where I studied in the area of theopoetics and science fiction. So Octavia Butler, Afrofuturism, those areas. I'm really interested in the ways that we can utilize and understand creativity as a form of not only healing, but also to move us toward action in areas of justice and to think through other theological things like eschatology. How do we understand how we understand our relationship to the divine as it relates to creativity in the arts?
Thank you, Dr. Tyler. And I am Dr. Jaclyn Williams. I am an assistant professor of preaching and chaplaincy at Fuller. I am rooted in Fuller, Texas, in Houston, Texas. But I am also an alum of Fuller. I got my MDiv with worship theology and the arts emphasis a few years ago. And I'm an actor and a playwright. And so my interests go to integration and non-dualism, and how that can be the center of healing that arts help us engage. Because as artists, it's something we naturally do as a part of our processes. So I'm going to start asking the panel, because we're talking about healing in the arts, and we're talking about the arts as liberation. So for each of you, from your areas of expertise, I mean, how is art a catalyst and an agent for healing and liberation? Not just the product, the manifestation that someone might come and consume, but the process as artists or those who are engaged in conversations about art and culture and theology. And we can just dive in, whoever is ready.
You said a whole lot of
Pressure. Well, you said the key word for me, and that's process. You know, and I do believe that art, the end product, has a healing capacity as well, but there is something about the act of making that allows for different possibilities to open up. I'll give an example. So I run a residency program, and the one thing that we ask our artists to do is to invite their communities into their creative process. And I think that's what makes our residency a little bit unique. So we're not asking them to only create artistic products. We're saying we want you to actually take a leadership position and teach people about what it is that you're doing. And we're not trying to get them to make these masterpieces of artwork. We're trying to get them to dive into the creative process, because something within the creative process allows you to tap into a part of yourself that a lot of times cognitively we're not able to get to. Like working through your hands, working through your body, working through your voice allows some other expression to come forth. And what I found is, especially when you're doing this within community, there is a really, really interesting energy that happens. When you're making with people, you're thinking creatively, you're thinking innovatively, you're thinking outside of your norm. And to me, that's the point. It's getting together, it's working in the process. And then, of course, we want the end result to be beautiful, but that's not actually the point for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. That's community I think is key to that. So thank you for highlighting that. Yes, Dr. Tyler.
A few years ago, I was asked about the field of theology and the arts, theology and culture, and where it was going in the future. And one of the things I said is, as a field, we need to shift from thinking about artistic product as a metaphor for our theological inquiry to looking at the artistic and the creative process as its own epistemology or its own way of knowing. An example I'll also give is at that same consultation, there was a gentleman sitting next to me at the table, and he is of African descent and also Indigenous Canadian. And he was beading as the presenter was speaking, and I began to watch him bead. And as he's watching me watch him, he begins to explain the process of beading in his culture and how each of the different colors of the beads represented a different element of the culture, how the thread itself represented this understanding of memory as he was beading. And so it was literally the embodiment of the idea of the product was beautiful, yes, but it was in the actual process of the beading that he was learning the lessons and remembering his culture. So the knowing was in the making, and the product was just a remembrance of the lessons that you learned in the making. And so I think that there is definitely a certain type of knowing that gets beyond here's how we understand it theoretically. When we begin to make it, we begin to have a different way of knowing that I think is important.
Yeah, that's amazing. Melanie, Dr. Williams.
Go ahead, Dr. Williams. I see your hand is up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I so appreciate what both of you have said about the creative process, and that kind of opened up a lot of things for me, and the possibilities that open in the creative process. But I was thinking more so about the art has a kind of transcending quality. And I'm thinking of this notion of synesthesia, this idea where one sense passes into the other. How did the scripture say, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good? How does one achieve sight? By what one tastes.
Yes.
And to me, that's why art is so powerful, because it allows us to take bits of reality and create new realities, and it enables people to see to hear things by what they see. It enables people to feel things by what they hear, and so art has that quality, and it touches us, and it changes us, and it transforms us, and we see new possibilities.
Yes. Melanie, do you have?
Love hearing from each of you. As we had a moment to gather last week, and I was able to share a bit of this with the other panelists, but my mind, as I think about what has art as liberation looked like for me, my mind goes back to 2020, and just the constant assault that we were receiving of seeing these images of Black women and men being killed by police, and the way that impacted me emotionally and spiritually and physically as well, I'll say. I'm a person that thinks a lot about physicality as it relates to sport, but also physicality as it relates to our spirituality and the way that those two are intertwined. And one of the ways that I was really able to process what I was seeing, particularly in the instance of Breonna Taylor's murder, was seeing her portrait that Amy Sherrill had painted. And that was a piece that in a lot of ways helped draw me out of the numbness that I was feeling. And it gave me a way to remember her as more than a hashtag. So as the pandemic lifted and I was able to actually travel from where I was in Houston to Washington, D.C. to the museum, that trip really took on a quality of pilgrimage for me, because I was able to do something with my body to remember her, and going to physically stand in front of her portrait and see it and bear witness to it. and the beauty of it, and the way that her memory continues on, her spirit continues, despite what happened to her body. So the act of me being able to physically go and see that liberated me in a sense. And even to this day, I have a copy of the Vanity Fair magazine that her portrait was on the cover of. I keep that in my home as a tribute to her. So in that sense, each time I look at it, I think not only of her and of the ways in which I feel connected to her and related to her, but I think of all of us, and those who have lost their lives to police brutality as well. So yeah, in that sense, art has liberated me and continues to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm picking up a little bit from what each of you is sharing, this idea of phenomenology, right? Our capacity to feel and our sensibilities, and giving validation to that in and of itself is revelation, right? And not necessarily needing to go to that immediate place of, okay, what does it mean and how do I put it down on paper? But just recognizing something is happening in my being, that this art, this process of crafting has inspired. And so my next question is about, thank you, Melanie, for lifting up Brianna, because we have these visceral responses. Well, I cannot speak for everyone, right? But as a person of color, as a woman in the United States, I have these visceral responses. And oftentimes I don't know what it is, what I need, what's going on in the moment. I'm just having a visceral response, right? And there's a part of me that has a signal of like, you need to shut that down. You need to shut that down, right? So I'm shutting down my sensibility, that gift that I have. So if each of you could talk about, if art helps us lift up the validation of sensibility and sensing, and that is revelation knowledge, how can we translate that to those who are like, but I'm not an artist? Like, I'll call the artist in to do their art thing and I will appreciate the product, but I'm not an artist. How can we invite that kind of processing when people are so compartmentalized into either you're this or you're that?
I'm happy to respond first because this is literally my realm. This is what I do all the time. So I work with a lot of different nonprofit organizations, churches, run schools as well. And basically what they'll have me do is come in as an artist and liturgist in residence. And the number one thing that they're asking is, how can we participate in what you're doing? And that's my favorite question, because I'm all about figuring out how to create interactive experiences where people can touch things and make things and create things. And so part of helping people to get past the idea of, oh, I'm not an artist, is just to give them something simple to do. You know, something very, very simple. Could be just coloring on a piece of paper, could be helping to create or weave a sculpture, you know, where everybody gets to participate and it's not dependent upon one person having to make something, you know. And I love doing this. This is my favorite thing because a lot of people are so afraid of the arts. You know, I'm not the creative type. Actually, we're all very much so creative, you know. And I love to challenge people whenever they think that about themselves. You really don't know what you can actually create. You don't actually know what's possible until you give it a try. My own story is a little bit like that. I don't have a background in the arts, you know, and it was really only by trusting that God was developing something in me and me having the desire to try something new that I'm even here sitting on the stage today talking about this. So yes.
Yeah. So trust and vulnerability, I'm hearing as two things we can lift up as those artists and saying, yeah, we can hold this space. Trust and vulnerability.
That and a little courage.
Yeah, and a little courage. Yeah.
I think I'll just say you don't have to be an artist to engage in creativity. I think that statement, I'm not an artist, I'm going to go somewhere with this, so just go with me here.
We're with you.
The whole I am not an artist thing, I think honestly it's steeped in capitalism, in the sense of I have to be fully realized in a vocational thing that I can offer to marketplace and the people in order to participate in that thing. So you say, I'm not an artist. I don't fulfill the fullness of that vocation. So I can't color on a page or play on a guitar. I can't, you can only do that thing if it ends in some kind of marketable product. I think that that's the first thing we need to strip away. You don't need to be an artist to create. I think that the act of creativity stripped from the act of marketable product is where people start to ask questions about, okay, when am I doing this for? Why can't I just have, I don't know, a hobby that you don't have to share with other people, that doesn't have to be marketable or commodified, right? There are other ways that you can get out of participating in these things other than your labor. So I think that the idea of I am not an artist is steeped in this thing of, if it is not something that can be produced as labor, then I can't participate in it. And I think that's the thing we need to strip away so that people can learn to play again. Going back to what we talked about yesterday,
Yes.
we can learn to play, because play is being able to engage in these things without caring about what the market or what the world thinks that you should offer to them.
Yes. And yes, that goes back to Dr. Talbert talking about the art of empire and the performative aspect, right, of artistry, just to have the product, right? So we need to decenter that viewpoint of artistry. I love that. Yes, Melanie, Dr. Williams, anything to add?
Sure, I like to jump in to your question about, and I appreciate everything that I've heard. To your question about safeguarding art and creating space for art in our communities. I think that one of the most powerful things we could do is to expose people to art.
Yes.
Expose our young people to art, because expose people to beauty. Because when you expose to that which is beautiful, it calls for something inside of you. There's a line in Gene Toomer's Cain, where it says, call them from their houses and teach them to dream. That which is beautiful calls us from those places, right? And it enables our capacity to dream. Also, I was thinking about, as my two colleagues were speaking, the Black church tradition. And one of the most powerful things about the Black church tradition is precisely this idea where those old church mothers with discernment, they would call forth gifts in people. Yeah, and I think about my own journey. I didn't see myself as a musician, but there was a church mother that used to say, come and you play. Now that's something that I enjoy doing, but she had discernment, and she saw the capacity for me to be able to call forth that gift. And I think that we safeguard that space, and we especially with our young people, and we call forth gifts in them and allow them to create that which is beautiful.
Yeah, safeguard that space. I love that. Melanie, anything to offer?
Well, I thought of an example. From my time at Fuller, actually. One of the first courses that I took at Fuller, took with Dr. Vince Bantu. Shout out Dr. Bantu. TH553. It was a race, religion, theology.
TH553.
I don't know what that syllabus is looking like at this moment, but I'll tell you the story. We had an assignment. That we had to depict our visualization of Jesus's racial identity using art. We had to use some type of artistic medium to do that. So the point of the project wasn't whose art was the best or was the art good, but it was, to depict how do we understand the incarnate Jesus's racial identity. And I was so impacted by that exercise and the way that it forced me to visualize the divine and to interact with those in the course who were literally tuning in all over the world, right? So we're presenting our projects and they're all different. Jesus looks different to everyone. And that project was so impactful to me that I still have it. I keep it in my bedroom. It's on my dresser. And I have to see it every single day. And I have to reflect on the way that we understand that the way that we conceptualize Jesus isn't necessarily static. And the way that I've had to interrogate, why do I see Jesus this way? Who taught me this? Where am I getting these images from? how does it impact the way I interact in the world? The fact that I see Jesus looking like this and that I don't see him looking this other way that this other person sees. Implications for that are vast, but I did a lot of projects in seminary, wrote a lot of papers, but that assignment from the first quarter is one that I still remember vividly, and that I still work on it. I still update it. So I think that putting people in situations where they're having to engage with art, and it's not to make money, it's not in a competition, but it's a spiritual discipline, it's an exercise, it's for personal reflection, it's for pleasure and play. I think that those are all valuable and necessary.
And I love what you're saying, because it's this way of holding things with an open hand. You know, we live in a world, especially Western culture, where it's this duality. It's either this or it's that. And when you hold things with an open hand and say it is both and, then it almost forces you into that framework of curiosity and further interrogation. And when did we decide that that was a bad thing, right? That the further means, we are here at Fuller Theological Seminary. People come to get theological education. And I remember when I was an MDiv student with this worship theology and the arts emphasis, and there's a group of us artists, and we started to call ourselves artist theologians, right? Because we were trying to figure out this integration piece. So I would love each of you to talk about, as those who have engaged higher education, right? What does that artistic and creative framework bring to theology and doing the work of theology? And in my experience, it's a continual process for that to be validated in the academy and in spaces, right? People want to have that hard line. But I think that there's so much richness there, even what we've just talked about vulnerability as theologians, open-handedness as theologians. So if you would speak to, art is theology, and you've already spoken to that, but in more specific, explicit terms, what are we bringing to the academy? What do we hope that the academy can say, wait a minute, let's follow the lead of these artists? Yes, and let's start on the screen this time.
Go ahead, Doc.
Yes.
That's a very powerful question, actually. What is it that art brings to the academy? I think that art, certainly, and I mentioned this earlier, provides another way of seeing, but I also think that it brings with it another kind of grammar for discourse. That art kind of challenges us to kind of name new realities. Sometimes these realities haven't been created before, right? What is this? What is this beauty that lay before me? What kind of words, what language, as the hymn writer said, what language shall I borrow to talk about this reality? And with these new words, I think that the words provides us a way of creating new worlds and enabling people to see something that is different, to see something that to see a new world that is coming, to paint as it were, to cast a new Jerusalem. And so I think that art liberates us in those kinds of ways, and it sets us free to become liberators.
Sets us free to become liberators. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Melanie?
The first word that came to my mind was interdisciplinarity, really, right? So we're thinking about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Reverend Doctor. He's a pastor, prophet. He's also an academic, right? And I'm thinking about the ways, even as we reflect on his work, his rhetoric, his speeches, his preaching. He was always bringing together philosophy and theology and history and poetry and economics all into, a single product or multiple products. And, I did the MA in intercultural studies at Fuller. That's an interdisciplinary degree because I could not conceive of a way to explore the questions I wanted to explore coming through one vantage point. And I think that I think about our sacred text. I think about scripture, where it's a collection of history and poetry and literature. It's not just one thing. And I think that as much as we can, being able to expand our minds to think about God from these different vantage points and see God active in all spaces and in all things, and not think that, oh, we have to begin and end in this one space, just in theology, or we have to begin and end just in church history. So I think being able to open our minds, even as I think about the type of art that I like, it's typically multimedia. It's not usually just one mode or one discipline.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't know if y'all know this, but theology is art. How many of us can definitively say we know everything about God and it's exactly right?
This is being recorded.
How many
If you raise your hand?
How many of y'all? So y'all basically got these stories about these people and their encounter with the divine, and the traditions and the rituals and the worlds that they created after their encounters, their testimonies, the way that they organize their family systems, right? Their entire culture. You have inherited these ways in community where people have argued for centuries about how to implement these things into their world. And then you've created your own stories, and you've utilized your own poetry, and you sing your own songs, and you do your own embodied practices, all in relationship to the history of the testimonies you've received and your own encounters. I would hope you're still having them with the divine, right? What about that is only steeped in logic and reason? What about that is now artistic and creative and engaged in this notion of creating the worlds, right? Our worlds, like I love what Dr. Williams said about the words creating worlds. Words house worlds. So as you are even writing, you are creating. So the whole act of your theological engagement, your theological inquiry and journey is by default artistic. So I don't necessarily have any, this is being recorded, I don't care. I don't have any kind of agenda to save the institution of academia or to convince people that art is, if you weren't convinced by all the TV shows you watched in 2020, by all of the things you engaged with when there was a pandemic, that art is important to your life, there is nothing I can tell you or do to convince you otherwise. All I can do is to remind people to return to their bodies. There's this episode of The Good Place. And if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. If you're in any ethics class, just watch The Good Place. It'll help you break down so many things. But there's an episode of The Good Place where Chidi is trying to teach the group about the trolley problem. And Michael, who is kind of over it, is like, well, I mean, we've been sitting here talking for hours. Let's put it to work. And he snaps his fingers and they're on the trolley. And every iteration that Chidi is trying to teach them, he's having to live out. Now, Chidi has this issue where he can't make decisions, right? He's been studying philosophy for literal centuries now that he's dead, but he can't make an embodied decision because the moment all of that theory hits his body, he doesn't know how to process what is happening, and he freezes up and he doesn't make a decision. And now he's like in it. Now he's taken the theoretical, he's embodied it, and he can't do it. I think that there is something about the way in which we create and the way in which we engage art that reminds us that if all you have is theory and nobody taught you how to address what comes up in your body as you're trying to put that theory into practice, you're not going to be able to even make the decisions that you theoretically think are right. And I think the act of creativity and the arts help to build those muscles so it's not something that you have to calculate before you do and move into action.
Yes, yes. And that is why it is healing. Anything to add to that?
I mean, she said everything.
She
Tamisha's
did.
my
She's-
favorite person to sit next to. I mean, that's basically it. I have a really difficult time understanding theology apart from art. There really is no form of knowing God without knowing artist or artistry or creativity. I mean, this is the essence of who God is, right? I love the fact that our cells are continually multiplying. And I love the fact that in space, the same thing is happening. There's no moment and point in creation where anything is still. And that means that God is constantly creating. So there really is no way to understand God apart from creativity. I will also say, as far as academia is concerned, it was really only art that even brought me to Fuller in the first place. But similar to what Melanie said, every single course that had a real impact on me had something to do with making. Shout out to Cutter Calloway. He's going to kill me for like putting him on the spotlight, but he was the first professor to allow me really the freedom to bring my artistry into the classroom. I was like, I don't want to write a paper only. I want to see if I can make something with everything that you're teaching me. Otherwise, it's in one ear and out the other. If I can't do anything with it, it has no root, in my opinion. And as soon as I was able to do that, it was like the lid popped off, right? All of a sudden, I'm able to soak myself into all of this supposed knowledge that I'm supposed to be gaining only through my intellect. It was only by putting my hands down to paper or by moving my body or opening my voice that I was able to really connect with God and what my professors were attempting to teach me. But I agree with Tamisha in the sense that I don't really think the point is trying to save the institution. But I will say this because we're having a conversation on healing, right? I think in terms of academia, what's really needed to heal the institution is to remember the body, to remember creativity, to remember that we are not just being sitting in our chairs, listening at people talk at us. And I apologize that this is the format that y'all are hearing this, right? What I really want to do is have y'all get up and do something. But we're here for now. This is a part of it. But it's only one half of the equation. We're only getting half of the story if this is all we do. If all you get out of education is sitting and listening at somebody, you're only getting half the story.
Yeah. This is so good. Okay, so I asked you to prepare your questions. And now we are transitioning to that question time. I know that so much has been lifted and offered, and it's very rich. But remember what we said about the process of art. Even in your question asking, it does not have to be a perfect product of the perfect question. So please don't remain in your seat and not lift your hand up because you feel like your question is imperfect.
Throughout human history, there has been no separation. It must have been only in the last 200-300 years that we could only conceive of even asking these questions, and that these questions would have any sort of meaning. I mean, if you think of Islam, I mean, the total integration of art and their spiritual beings. Think of Leonardo da Vinci, his engineering, his art, and his spiritual art, astonishing. So my question is, how did we ever get to be in this place? What happened and when? And how would you explain the fact that we're sitting here having this bizarre conversation?
Great question.
Answers.
Colonialism.
Colonialism.
I can expound a little bit, but I mean, so much happened, right, in the era of colonialism and industrialization. This sort of mechanizing of the body, get on the get on the line and do your part and just that part, and together we're going to construct this thing, but our souls aren't really in it. We have become the machines, so to speak. What I really find interesting is the fact that we are in this age of the boom of AI, right? And so now people are so concerned that their own mechanization is at risk, which I think is really funny, right? Like, why do we have this framework that we need to be afraid of technology when really it can aid in the creation of the mechanization and help us to get back to our own creative roots, you know? But my response to your question really has a lot to do with colonialization and then also industrialization of society, treating people as commodities, treating people as nuts and bolts in a larger system that's supposed to benefit just a couple and just a few. I think we lost the essence of people. And I think that's why we're even having this conversation. And I agree with you. It's very bizarre. Very bizarre.
There's a question on this.
Go ahead.
Is your name Dea?
It is, yes.
So my question, you said you kind of called out the format of this.
I did.
You said, you know, if you had it your way, you would do something with us. My question is, if time allows, would you do something?
I would love to. Yes.
Oh, we have one more question over here.
Yes. Hi. I was really interested. I took all the notes, like you said. Really interested in what you all said about capitalism and vocation and overemphasis on product. And I, as an artist, sometimes have that struggle between product versus process. And if you don't share it, it didn't happen kind of culture that we're in. So what are some practices you would suggest to help creatives focus on process and making process a sacred part of making?
Yes, I will say it is tricky when you are an artist, when artistry is your passion and your vocation, because I think you're constantly having to navigate with who you are as a creative person, but then also the many gazes, right, that you have to encounter, negotiate with, while staying true to who you are. So I'm also an artist. I'm a poet and a writer. And part of it is my artistry started in articulation of who I was in the world. So I didn't start my art for other gazes. I started my art because it was the only way I knew how to articulate myself. And then I found that, other people resonate with how I articulate to myself. So maybe that is something that I can share. And I think that there is this constant measure of offering gifts to the community versus offering things to the marketplace, because you want this thing that you're passionate about to also sustain you in a particular way. And I think that there will always be that challenge. And so part of the practice, I think, is going to be unique to the artist, but I think that there needs to be an understanding of who you are when you are offering gifts to community, who you are when you are just participating in an act of expression and going back to maybe the original reason why you got into the practice in the first place, and then a negotiation of how you offer that to marketplace. And I think that there has to be a certain knowing and rootedness, both in you and also in the community that has sent you and is nourishing you as you go forth, so that you can make those distinctions. If you're not able to make them, then you will lose yourself to the sense of marketplace, because you'll misinterpret this demand of a gaze outside of you as an affirmation of who you are. And as we know in art, most of the people that we really love as artists were dead before we even liked their work. So that's a failed journey in the first place. Right. So you really do have to be rooted in your community and what brought you to the art, so then you can begin to properly negotiate the boundaries for yourself as you're offering your art to market.
Yeah. I think too, it's something that you said about sharing and offering, because the process is part of it too, right? We've talked about that. So how do you invite people to share in your process? So they're not just, whether it's for the marketplace or just, hey, inviting your friends over and saying, because there's something with my students when I give them the artistic option, right? And they take it, I ask them to show me their process. And it's not just so I can prove that they've had a process, although that is part of it, but it's because something is happening in that process. And the sharing of the process is a way of that offering up to community. So I think if we can have ways of doing that and improvising within that, it sort of girds us for the marketplace part of it, where we are hoping to also be able to eat and pay rent and have all those things happen. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing. It was very rich. My question is with the aim and the topic of what we're talking about, healing. So for the things that were once broken, were once hurt, or currently are in that state, how do we use the agency that we've been given in art to aid that process? And what I'll set it up with is just the fact that, we've talked about the non-dualism, Dr. Right? So the whole thing of how do we empower the individual to say you can be individually expressive and aid healing. You can be collaboratively expressive and aid healing. You can also be, in a place where you can go with other people or certain segments of communities and aid healing, right? So that's something I'm really curious about, because from an African proverb, they say if you can talk, you can sing. If you can walk, you can dance. So there isn't the dualism of bad or good art, even though bad and good is a real thing. At the same time, I mean, for real. And at the same time too, there's a whole sense of understanding that it's an expression. So just, that whole sense of how do we guide that process and empower the individual to have the agency in art for healing?
Yeah. Anyone on screen or on stage?
I was yielding to my own on-screen colleagues. If they wanted to share first. No?
Go ahead.
Well, hello, it's me again. I think that is an excellent question. And I think the way that you framed it, right? Individual expression, collaborative, making communal space. I think that the ways that we engage in the practice of art and in the practice of healing, not just therapeutic, like I color a lot because it helps relieve my stress. That may be my individual notion of like creating the space for my own healing. But then there are practices that you have to do in community that I think is going to be unique to that community. So if you're in a space where people can acknowledge their body, maybe doing an embodied exercise or dancing is what's going to help them to bring the aspect of the healing, right? I think that there's also different aspects of the role of abandonment, right, as a form of resistance. So when you go to certain aspects of protests or demonstrations and you see people singing all of a sudden, or dancing all of a sudden, or playing all of a sudden, right? It is this reclaim, right, of their own sense of agency, right? Of their own sense of play, of their own sense of knowing who they are in the midst of that space that says, we are not going to be who you, this space, right, has called us to be, but through our play, through our dancing, through our singing, through our engagement, we're going to create something otherwise. And I think that that also can play a role in the aspect of healing because it gives people permission, I think one of the colleagues said earlier, of other possibilities. Oh, I can do that? Oh, I didn't know I can. So you mean I don't have to wait for? No, you can create and make and do right now. And so I think that the practice of it, both internally and in community, I think differs. It's not blanket. I think sometimes we treat art as blanket. Let everybody just come together and sing Kumbaya and that'll fix. No, some people need to sing some Kendrick because lament is what's needed in that space. And so there's all these different elements of art that I think is going to be, but I think if we use them as tools of healing, not just blanket remedies for this healing that we have conjured, I think that would help.
Anyone else for that particular question? I know we have another question, but I don't want to cut anybody off. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so growing up, my mom always asked me if the music I was listening to was Christian. And I would usually tell her, like, I think it's human, though. But I guess what I'm trying to ask is how can Christian art become more hospitable to the human experience? Because I feel like we've kind of had this thought that, okay, we're going to create for Christians and just stay here. Where do you think that comes from, and how can we be more hospitable?
What is your name? David. Yeah. Online colleagues, I could talk forever, so I'm just gonna.
I'm so glad you asked this because I've really been sitting in this text in preparation for today, and I'd love to share it. 1 Samuel chapter 16, I think, is a really interesting look at this question. Beginning in verses 4 through 23, it's the story where Saul has been rejected by God, right? So we begin with that. Saul's been rejected by God, and then we're told that God has sent a spirit to torment him, which is a lot. And I can't even begin to address that. But what does Saul do? So he has an attendant who is like looking at him in this torment day by day. We don't know what that looks like, you know, in the physical sense. But he's like, do you want me to call somebody to play some music? So this is, you know, an Old Testament version of the homie offering up a playlist when their friend is depressed, right? Which is an act of ministry. So David ends up being the one that's called. David's out tending the sheep. He is a shepherd. He's not a professional musician, but we know that he's good at it. He's good at playing music. And he comes and he plays the lyre. We're not told that the lyrics are specifically lifting up the Lord. It might have just been an instrumental, but whatever happens in that moment, we're told that the tormenting spirit actually leaves every time David plays this music. And I just think that, I think we overthink sometimes. We overthink. And what is Christian music? In this text, we're just told that God has rejected Saul, but God is with David. So it's the presence of God being with David, who is doing the playing. That's what makes the tormenting spirit leave, not necessarily the notes or the lyrics that are being played. So I just think that there's a lot there. Obviously, we don't have time to go into it, but I think that's a really interesting response to people who want to categorize music as Christian or unchristian.
Yeah. I think we have online.
Yeah, so we have Jeremiah from online asking for church leaders, what are some good ways to begin exposing, say, middle and high school students to art in their formation that opens them to new grammar in their conversation with God rather than offend their reasonable Christian sensibilities?
Yeah. Come to art night.
Yeah,
Come
we
to
have art night tomorrow starting at
Art
5
night
p.m.
tomorrow.
I would say that many churches have Christian education programs with Sunday school or Bible study or what do they call that? Vacation Bible school. I think all of those become avenues.
Yeah.
But I think that part of the conscientization will need to take place. The work of conscientization will need to take place with those that teach and lead and instruct, because some of them perhaps could be set free to begin to engage art in new ways for allowing people to see the beauty of God's holiness and the holiness of God's beauty. And I think that is that's something that we already have in place in many churches. And I think that's a way to kind of lean into that.
Can I
Yes.
add one more thing to that too?
Yes, you can add one more thing, but I am going to ask you to do like a 90-second something. I'm putting you on the spot. Well, I didn't put you on the spot. We put it on the spot to do something. So,
Okay. Well, I just want to say also, there is something to allowing the kids to lead. They know what kind of art they want to look at and they know what kind of music they like to listen to. Why not just engage them in what they're already interested in? And then I'll leave that there.
yes. Because art can help us name, and that is healing. So, 90-second embodiment
90 seconds.
exercise that everyone in this room and online is going to engage in.
Can we have one more question?
Please.
Okay,
please.
go ahead. Kristen, you're being called out by name.
Wow. Well, maybe this is a segue for you to lead us into something in just a moment. But as a professor and as a therapist, I'm mindful I'm often in spaces of facilitating healing and reflection for my students, as a worship leader for congregations. And I'm just curious if y'all would end with an invitation to us, as those who are facilitating spaces of healing, of how to engage in rhythms that are regular and healing for us. I'm thinking about the phrase, physician, heal thyself, what it means to actually be those who are bringing healing, are engaged in that process of healing first and foremost, so we can love our neighbors as we love ourselves?
Such a good question. You don't want to ask.
I think that whatever you do is going to aid into that.
Yes.
But I will
Yes.
say, and I say this to students and to people that I coach, if you're in a space where you are facilitating aspects of healing, you must have, this is a requirement, you must have a ritual of release. So you are taking on all of this energy, all of this stuff, all of this testimony, and then you go home and you're like, oh, that was a harsh day, and you don't do anything about it. And then you go back to work and you do the same thing. And now you're wondering why you got so many problems, why your back hurt, why you got headaches, why you're feeling so down, why you are doing all of this stuff. All of this stuff you carrying ain't yours. So even if your ritual is, thank you for allowing me to be in a space where I release what is not mine. I recognize that maybe something came up in me as I heard and resonated with that testimony, and you begin to have practices of letting go what's not yours. You'll begin to recognize what is, and then you can address those accordingly. But a ritual of release is required if you're facilitating any kind of spaces of healing, because you'll take on what's not yours, and then you'll start to get bogged down, and you won't be able to see through all of the mess.
Amen.
That's what we're going to do. Create a ritual of release. Please stand. Thank you, Tamisha, for the language. I would love if you got out of the rows that you're in, just kind of find your own place around the room. Stretch out a little bit. I will say what I'm going to invite you into does not require that you be any kind of performer, dancer, mover. Just as you are is just right. And that's exactly what we're about to do before we get started. Just do some light stretching. Move your body around. You've been sitting for a little while. Move some more. You don't have to stay in your little box. This is why I love being in academic institutions. We get like really tight, like we can't move around. Turn in a couple of circles. Just get a little silly. If you're online, I invite you to stand up. You don't have to sit in your chairs. You're invited to do this too, in whatever way makes sense to you. And then I'm going to invite you to, we don't have that much time, but I'm going to do it anyway. Get in groups of 4, just whomever's around you. Yes, you have to talk to each other. Imagine that. All right. Here's our prompt. Yes, and it's okay if it's not 4 exactly. See how much lighter the room just became because you started talking to each other? Yes. All right, here's our prompt. So within your group and using minimal words, I know there are a lot of pastors in the room, minimal words, name something that you want to leave in this space, something that you've been carrying, something that has a little weight to it, that you want to leave in this place. If you can say all of that in one word, I applaud you. But just one word and say it to your group members. And then I'll give you the next prompt. And put it in, yes, put it in the chat if you're online. Only one word. One thing you want to leave in this place that you want to release. I'm not going to give you a lot of time for this, so make sure everybody in your group has had a chance to say their one word. And if you have, raise your hand for me so I can see. That looks good. We're waiting on one group in the back, 2 groups. Has everybody said their one word? Professors and pastors do not do very well with this. Are you? All right. What about this group back here? Everybody good? All right. So here's the challenge that might make you a little bit uncomfortable, but that's okay. We're all friends in here. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to find an expression for that word. What would it look like for you to drop that off of your body? Don't overthink this. You have 30 seconds. It can be wild, it can be silly. What's that expression going to be? If you're online, I invite you to do the same thing, find your own expression. Yes, come on, Dr. Williams, I see you. Yes, yes. Amen.
You may not realize right now cognitively, but your body knows it, is you just experienced some healing.
Come on.
You just experienced some healing. And so I want to say thank you to Melanie Taylor, Dr. Eric Williams, Dea Jenkins, Dr. Tamisha Tyler. I am humbled and filled with joy. This is an ongoing process and conversation. And I want to end with these words from Gwendolyn Brooks, who says, "We hail what heals and sponsors and restores." That is what art does. It heals, it sponsors, it restores. So we can trust that.